My parents kicked me out at 18. 10 years later, they begged me to save the family business. Hello, friends, my name is Adrian Walker. I'm 18-year-old.
On a freezing winter night in New York, 18-year-old Adrian Walker stood inside the enormous marble hallway of the Walker family mansion, completely unaware that his entire life was about to collapse. Outside, heavy rain slammed against the glass windows while thunder echoed across the dark sky. Inside the house, the atmosphere felt even colder. Standing directly in front of him was Richard Walker, his father, a man known throughout the city as one of New York's most successful business tycoons. But tonight, he was not looking at Adrian like a son. He was looking at him like a problem that needed to disappear. Richard Walker slowly loosened his expensive necktie before staring directly into Adrian's eyes with a level of disappointment that felt sharper than anger itself. Without hesitation, he pointed toward the front door and spoke the words Adrian would remember for the next decade. He told him that if he truly believed he was smarter than the family that had built everything around him, then he could leave immediately and figure out life on his own. The words were not spoken during an argument. They were calm, deliberate, and terrifyingly final, making it painfully clear that this was not a threat. It was a permanent decision. Adrian stood frozen in disbelief as he slowly turned his head toward his mother, Eleanor Walker, hoping she would intervene before things went too far. For 18 years, she had always been the softer voice inside the household, the person who quietly balanced Richard's strict and controlling personality. But tonight, something had changed. Eleanor stood near the staircase with both arms crossed tightly against her chest, refusing to make eye contact with her own son. Her silence was deafening. In that moment, Adrian realized something even more painful than being rejected by his father. His mother had already chosen a side, and it was not his. Standing near the kitchen entrance was Lucas Walker, Adrian's older brother, casually leaning against the wall with a faint smile slowly forming across his face. Lucas had always been the golden child of the Walker family. While Adrian was curious, independent, and obsessed with technology, Lucas had spent his entire life obeying every expectation their father placed upon him. Richard saw Lucas as the future of the Walker empire, the perfect successor destined to inherit the family furniture manufacturing company. But as Adrian looked at his brother enjoying the moment, he understood something dark. Lucas wasn't surprised by what was happening. He had been waiting for this. The reason behind this family war had started months earlier, when Adrian made the unforgivable mistake of telling his father he wanted a completely different future. For generations, the Walker family had built one of the largest luxury furniture manufacturing businesses in New York, creating custom interior products for millionaires, hotels, and corporate clients across the country. Richard expected both of his sons to continue expanding the empire. But Adrian had a different dream. Instead of furniture factories and corporate warehouses, he wanted to build software companies, create technology, and innovate in a world his father considered temporary and foolish. That night's disaster began during what looked like an ordinary family dinner. Richard casually asked Adrian when he planned to officially begin working inside the family business full-time after graduation. Adrian calmly responded that he had secretly applied for a scholarship program in California focused on software engineering and startup development. The moment those words left his mouth, the atmosphere changed instantly. Richard's face tightened. Eleanor stopped eating. Lucas quietly leaned back in his chair, watching carefully. Then Richard stood up so suddenly that his chair nearly crashed against the floor, his patience finally disappearing after months of silent disagreement. Richard Walker accused Adrian of betraying everything the family had spent generations building, claiming that turning his back on the company was the same as rejecting the family itself. Adrian, exhausted after years of pressure, finally spoke honestly for the first time in his life. He told his father that he never wanted to spend his life managing factories, negotiating supply contracts, and protecting traditions he didn't believe in. He wanted freedom to build something of his own. The sentence barely finished before Richard's face turned ice cold. At that exact moment, Adrian unknowingly crossed a line his father would never forgive. Without raising his voice any further, Richard slowly stood from the dinner table and walked toward Adrian with terrifying calmness. The entire room remained silent except for rain hitting the windows behind them. Richard looked directly at his son and simply told him that if he no longer respected the future chosen for him, then he no longer deserved the privileges this family had provided. Then he said the sentence that shattered everything. He told Adrian to pack his belongings immediately and leave his house forever. There was no warning, no negotiation, and absolutely no chance for forgiveness. The decision had already been made. Adrian rushed upstairs in complete silence, still hoping the situation might somehow reverse itself before it became permanent. He opened his bedroom door and stared at everything around him. The expensive desk, the shelves full of books, the framed childhood photographs hanging beside the window. This had been his home for 18 years, yet suddenly it felt like he had never truly belonged there at all. He quickly grabbed an old backpack and started stuffing random clothes inside while his thoughts raced uncontrollably. Somewhere deep down, he kept expecting footsteps approaching the room, someone arriving to stop him before everything fell apart completely. But those footsteps never came. Minutes later, Adrian walked back downstairs carrying the only possessions he now officially owned. Richard stood near the front entrance with complete emotional detachment written across his face. Alina remained silent beside the staircase, while Lucas quietly watched the entire moment unfold with disturbing satisfaction. Adrian paused for several seconds near the doorway, hoping his father might reconsider after seeing his son actually leaving. Instead, Richard reached forward, opened the massive front door himself, and coldly whispered 2 words: "Good luck." The sentence felt less like encouragement and more like an official declaration that Adrian Walker no longer existed to them. The freezing rain outside instantly soaked Adrian's clothes as he stepped away from the mansion and onto the empty street. Behind him, the heavy wooden front door slammed shut with brutal finality, creating a sound he would replay inside his mind for years afterward. He stood there frozen, staring back at the enormous home where he had spent his childhood, trying to understand how family bonds could disappear so quickly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, planning to call a friend for help. But seconds later, the screen displayed something new. His cellular service had already been disconnected. Richard had acted immediately. For nearly an hour, Adrian wandered through the dark Manhattan streets without any destination, carrying one backpack while trying to ignore the overwhelming fear beginning to take control of his thoughts. Just hours earlier, he had lived inside luxury most people only dreamed about. Now he had no home, no transportation, and no money beyond a few emergency bills hidden inside his wallet. The reality of his situation slowly became impossible to ignore. Survival had suddenly become his only priority. The future he once imagined now felt impossibly distant, and for the first time in his life, Adrian understood what true uncertainty actually felt like. Eventually, Adrian found temporary shelter inside a nearly empty bus terminal several miles away from his family home. The bright fluorescent lights overhead made the place feel strangely lifeless, as a few exhausted travelers quietly sat scattered across metal benches. Adrian found an empty seat near the corner and placed his backpack beside him. Hunger had started building in his stomach, but fear was stronger than hunger now. Every possible future seemed terrifying. College plans were destroyed. His family connections were gone. The life he once assumed would always protect him had disappeared in less than an hour, leaving only silence and brutal uncertainty behind. Morning arrived painfully fast. Adrian woke up still sitting against the cold bus station wall with a stiff neck and barely any sleep. He reached into his wallet and counted exactly $38 in cash. That was everything he now owned in the world. Across the street, a small convenience store had just opened, and after buying the cheapest coffee and sandwich available, he sat outside watching morning traffic flood the city. Yesterday, he had lived in a mansion worth millions of dollars. Today, he was calculating whether he could afford another meal. Life had changed so violently that it barely felt real anymore. Determined not to completely collapse, Adrian spent the entire day searching for somewhere cheap enough to stay temporarily. After hours of walking, he found a rundown hostel located in one of the rougher neighborhoods in Brooklyn. The receptionist barely looked at him while handing over a room key attached to a cracked plastic tag. Inside, the room smelled terrible. The wallpaper was peeling from the walls, and the mattress looked older than Adrian himself. But despite how miserable the room appeared, it offered something incredibly valuable: time. 3 nights of shelter gave him 72 hours to figure out how to survive. The next morning, Adrian began searching desperately for work. He visited restaurants, small retail stores, gas stations, and local businesses, hoping someone might hire him quickly enough to stop his money from disappearing completely. But rejection came over and over again. Managers glanced at his age, his lack of work experience, and politely turned him away within seconds. One convenience store owner actually laughed before saying Adrian looked like the kind of privileged rich kid who had never worked a difficult day in his life. The painful truth behind those words hit harder than expected. For the first time ever, Adrian had absolutely nothing to rely on. As evening approached and desperation grew stronger, Adrian finally found a janitorial service company willing to hire him immediately for overnight office cleaning shifts. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but at this point, any income meant survival. Hours later, he stood alone inside a downtown corporate building, wearing cheap rubber gloves while holding industrial cleaning supplies for the very first time. His supervisor casually pointed toward the restroom area and told him bathrooms needed attention first. Adrian stared at the dirty tile floor silently. Less than 2 days ago, he had lived in unimaginable luxury. Now survival depended on scrubbing strangers' toilets. Exhausted after finishing his first brutal shift near sunrise, Adrian slowly walked back toward the hostel while dark thoughts began forming inside his mind. Anger had finally started replacing shock. He thought about Richard standing emotionless near the front door. He thought about Alina's silence and Luca's smiling while everything collapsed. For a brief moment, he imagined revenge, imagined returning one day and forcing every one of them to regret what they had done. But deep inside, he understood something important. Revenge belonged to powerful people, and right now he had absolutely no power. Before thinking about revenge, he first needed to survive. Later that same night, Adrian opened the aging laptop. He had packed moments before leaving the mansion and sat staring at the glowing screen for nearly an hour without moving. Then something inside him shifted. He realized that asking for forgiveness or returning home was no longer an option. From that moment forward, he made a promise to himself. He would never ask the Walker family for help again, no matter how difficult life became. More importantly, he swore that one day he would become successful enough that Richard Walker would regret ever treating his own son like disposable property. That silent promise became the beginning of everything. Over the following weeks, Adrian created a punishing daily routine built entirely around survival and self-improvement. During the night, he cleaned office buildings for barely enough money to cover rent and food. During the day, he taught himself programming through free online courses, spending countless hours studying software development and startup systems he had once dreamed about pursuing in college. Sleep became a luxury he rarely allowed himself. Slowly, his pain transformed into discipline, and discipline transformed into ambition. Adrian Walker had lost everything in a single night, but deep inside, a far more dangerous version of himself was quietly beginning to emerge.